Welcome to another exciting episode of the Bright Light Show. This week we're going to be meeting a couple who were very important when the first churches were just starting to meet. But before we think about them, we're going to get our brain cells working. It's time for a quiz with Paul.
A quiz with Paul.
Hello children, it's nice to see you again this morning. I'm sorry we haven't got any sun, but we have got 5 questions for you. 5 seconds each, shout out the answers. The first question: Jesus calmed the storm the same day he told the parable of the sower. Is that true or false? Jesus calmed the storm the same day as he told the parable of the sower. True or false? That is true. The second question: the man whose daughter was healed was the ruler of the centurions. Is that true or false? Now that's false. The man was a ruler of the synagogue. Number 3. Jesus fed the 5,000 barley loaves and fish. Is that right? Yes, it is. That's recorded. Now, number 4. After Jesus walked on water, he got out of the boat with the disciples, and immediately the boat was at the place they were going to. Now, is that true or false? Is true. It was a miracle, but yes, the boat moved to where they were going, just like that. And finally, to heal the deaf and dumb man, Jesus put his fingers in his ears, spat and touched his tongue, and said, "Be open," and he was healed. Is that what happened? Is that true or false? That is also true. That is the way that Jesus healed this man. Good, well done. Look forward to seeing you in the future. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, so now it's time for our story about this couple who were really important when the first churches were just beginning to meet. Let's find out what happens.
Slapstick Theater. Aquila and Priscilla. This is Aquila,
Heyo!
who was a Jewish man who was married to Priscilla.
Hi!
They lived in Italy until Claudius Caesar forced all of the Jews to move out of Rome.
Get out of here.
So they went to live in Corinth. There, they worked as tent makers and met Paul,
Oh, hey!
who told people about Jesus.
Hey, come on!
Paul lived and worked with Aquila and Priscilla while he was in Corinth, telling people about Jesus. Aquila and Priscilla went on a trip with Paul to the port of Ephesus.
Wait, see you in a bit.
While they were in Ephesus, they heard a man preaching named Apollos
That's me. Hey, wait up! Huh?
and taught him more about God.
Oh, alright.
They remained friends with Paul
Yeah!
and helped him in his mission to tell people about Jesus.
Hey, thanks for that.
They once even risked their lives for Paul.
Oh, thanks for that too.
When Aquila and Priscilla went back to Corinth, they gathered people to their home for church. Paul told the people in a letter that he was thankful for Aquila and Priscilla and their service to the church.
So that was the story of Priscilla and Aquila. Now, you might be thinking, well, I've never heard of them. How important can they be? Well, hang on right there, because we're going to find that out in just a few minutes. But first, let me ask you this. Can you think of any famous couples like Tom and Jerry, or Superman and Lois, or Batman and Robin, or Kermit the Frog and Miss Piggy? Well, Priscilla and Aquila, they were a famous couple in the early church, and they worked together. And we can read about lots of their interactions and their stories in the book of Acts, and they also pop up in some of Paul's letters. And that's really important because actually they helped Paul a lot. Now, when I say the first churches, I don't mean what some of your friends might think of when they think of church. Not that at all. I'm talking about a time when going to church in some areas was against the law, where you had to be really careful when you met together. I'm talking about a time when the first churches didn't meet in church buildings like we do now. They used to meet in shops, and when church was about sharing a meal together. The very, very first churches. That's what I'm talking about. And Priscilla and Aquila, they were leaders in the first churches, and they were really, really important to Paul. In fact, when Paul arrived in a city called Corinth, and that's where we get the book of Corinthians from, Priscilla and Aquila welcomed him and helped him, and they even gave him a job. And by the way, when I say Paul, I mean Paul, who was called Saul, who then spent all of his time walking around and telling people and showing people about Jesus and about what God is like. Well, they welcomed him and they let him stay with them. They even gave him a job as a tent maker. So Priscilla and Aquila were very important to Paul. And then Paul went on lots of journeys, as I've just said, travelling around, and Priscilla and Aquila accompanied him, and you can read that in Acts as well. And then there's a time when Priscilla and Aquila come across another man called Apollos, and you can read about him in the book of Acts. And they meet Apollos and they say, well, we want to help you even more. You're really good at speaking and telling people about Jesus, but there's more that you can learn. And so they get alongside Apollos and they help Apollos out. So here's a couple who used what they had, who worked together, and who were helping Paul, who was one of the most important leaders of the first churches. But that's not all, because there's more that we can learn about Priscilla and Aquila, like this. In the Bible, they're always named Priscilla and Aquila. And that's really unusual because Priscilla was the woman and Aquila was the man. But in their culture, the most important person would always be named first. And I'm afraid to say that was nearly always the man, because people believed that men were more important, that they were first. But here, in the first churches, in this Christian community, 5 out of 7 times, Priscilla is mentioned first. So these first churches were trying to show everybody else what God and God's kingdom is like. And so having a woman like Priscilla as the leader would have been pretty shocking and very unusual. But it was really important because it was their way of saying, in God's kingdom, yeah, women are just as important as men. Of course they are. And yeah, women can lead these groups. Of course they can. And that would really have challenged a lot of people. So Priscilla and Aquila were really important at helping some of the leaders like Paul and Apollos, at using what they had to help and support other people, and at showing people what God's kingdom is all about. Right, time for a craft.
Craft time.
Good morning, everybody. So for our craft today, we are going to be having a go at making some tents to remind us of Priscilla and Aquila and how they were tent makers and how they shared the message about Jesus as they worked. So for this, you're going to need a piece of paper, you're going to need some glue, some felt pens and some scissors. Now the first thing you need to do with your piece of paper is fold it in half. So you're going to fold it in half like that and keep that folded edge at the top. Then what you're going to do is you're going to find the middle of this folded edge. So just fold that bit in half and just pinch at the very top. You don't need to crease all the way down. We just need to find the middle. Then we want to make this look tent shape. At the moment it doesn't. So we're going to fold down a triangle on one side. So you've got a triangle folded down on one side and a triangle on the other. And we're going to try and get them roughly about the same size. So there we go. There are our 2 triangles. Now the next thing we're going to do is along these short edges, we're just going to put a bit of glue and glue the 2 edges together. We're not going to glue along the bottom because we want that bit to open up. So just along the short edges and glue those together. Okay, now there's your side with the triangles folded. You're going to turn it over so you've got this side. And what we're going to do is we're going to cut just in the top layer. We're going to cut all the way up to the point at the top, and this is going to make our tent doors. There we go, and we've got our tent doors that open up. And inside your tent you can do just as I have done. You can draw Priscilla and Aquila. You can decorate the front of your tent. I'm sure you can add lots more decoration. And if you want, you could write something a bit like I've written to remind us how they were sharing the message about Jesus.
Love that. Time now for our song.
Called Savior. Have you heard of His perfect love? Have you heard of the one in heaven? Have you heard how He gave His Son? 'Cause I have found this love. I believe in the Son. Show me your way. Jesus, you are my best friend, and you will always be. Nothing will ever change that. Jesus, you are my best friend, and you will always be. And nothing will ever change that. I believe in the one called Savior. I believe He's the risen one. I believe that I'll live forever. I believe that my King will come. 'Cause I have found this love. I believe in the Son. Show me your way. Jesus, you are my best friend, and you will always be. Nothing will ever change that. Jesus, you are my best friend, and you will always be. Nothing will ever change that. 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 Jesus, you are my best friend, and you will always be. Nothing will ever change that. Jesus, you are my best friend, and you will always be. And nothing will ever change that. You will always be, forever you and me. Oh, nothing will ever change. Jesus, you are my best friend, and you will always be. And nothing will ever change that. Jesus, you are my best friend, you are my best friend, you will always be. And nothing will ever change that. And nothing will ever change that. Nothing will ever change that. You will nothing will ever change that. Nothing will ever change that.
Takeaway. Number 1. Priscilla and Aquila were a really important couple when the first churches were just starting. Number 2. The first churches tried to show what God's kingdom was like, that everyone is welcome and everyone is equal. And that's why Priscilla could be named first and be a leader. Number 3, Priscilla and Aquila used what they had to help others, even saving Paul's life. What skills and abilities do you have that you could use to help others? And there it is. There's our takeaway for this week. So there's a little introduction to Priscilla and Aquila. Easily missed in the Bible, but actually really important. Important in that they invited and they welcomed in Paul. They taught Paul, they travelled with Paul, they supported Paul. But also really important in reminding us and showing us what God's kingdom is like. That everyone is valued and everyone is welcomed. I hope you have a lovely week. Stay safe, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week for another episode of The Bright Light Show. Boom!